AITA for leaving the hospital after my sister gave birth and announced the name of her baby. I, 32, have been dealing with infertility for 7 years now. My husband and I are prepared for the fact we might never get to have a child together, but it's not easy. We're both currently in individual therapy to help us process all of this and find a way to be at peace regardless of what the future holds for us. But I truly hope we are lucky enough to have a child. My husband and I have baby names picked out. We never talk about them, but we have a little note on our baby name book with our boy and girl name pick. It's in our bedroom. We don't look at it much anymore, but it keeps us hoping, you know. My sister, 36, has 5 daughters, and 2 weeks ago she gave birth to her first son. My husband was working, but I was at the hospital with my parents and my sister's ills waiting for the birth. Once he was born, we were called in to meet my nephew, and my sister told us they'd chosen the name Elio for him. She said the name was originally mine and my husband's top choice, but since we wouldn't be having any kids after all this time, she decided they should use it and not let the name go to waste being kept secret by me. It was then I remember seeing my sister at my room while she was pregnant a few months before. I thought nothing of it at the time, but realized she'd been snooping. My parents asked how she could do that without talking to me first. My sister replied that it seemed a shame to waste a perfectly good name if I asked her not to use it. I couldn't handle it, and I left. I didn't even say congrats or anything. I left and went home, and I cried for a while. The very next day, my sister called and asked me why I made it such a big deal. She also decided to drop that she was hurt. I never discussed my baby names with her, gatekeeping them, even when I knew I wouldn't have a baby. I asked her how she could go out of her way to take the one name my husband and I had picked. She called me sensitive. I ended the call without another word. My parents checked in on me 2 days after. But since then, my parents have said I should let it go and apologize for walking out. My sister also said I made her postpartum time, and it was very selfish on my part. AITA, consider subscribing for more stories. Here is another story. AITA for telling my parents. They became liars the second they started fostering their adopted daughter. My parents started fostering when I, 19F, was 6. My younger brother was 3 at the time. I never had a problem with it. It was normal, and I got along with a lot of the foster siblings who came to live with us. This then changed with Amy. I met Amy in 2nd grade. She was new to my class, and we just did not get along. I remember other kids saying she was mad at me, and I had no idea why. We only knew each other for a few days at that point. I remember thinking if she was mad at me for nothing, then I was mad at her. We clashed a lot. Then in 3rd grade, she started bullying me. She'd throw my lunch on the floor and step on it. She'd make up lies about me farting to get other kids to make fun of me. She told the teacher she wouldn't sit work with freaky eye. I have a scar across my left eye. She'd also say I was evil like Scar from The Lion King. The scar gave her plenty of ammunition, and eventually I became very self-conscious of this. My parents knew about the bullying, and they were called in to speak to teachers and the principal over the bullying. Turns out Amy was a foster kid. Guess who decided to take her in? My parents. We were 10. My parents decided to adopt her. My parents were asked how I felt about it by a lot of people. They lied and said I was good with it, and I was excited to help Amy and get along with her better. It was a lie. I screamed the house down when I found out and begged my parents not to. My brother didn't like Amy either. She had used him against me so many times at school, and he knew about it. My parents blamed me for my brother and Amy not getting closer. When I was 15, we had this really big fight. My parents told me Amy was as much my sibling as my brother was, and they weren't happy that I didn't acknowledge her as such. I told them I never would, that they could adopt her 100 times and I still wouldn't call her my sister. I told them they chose helping her over protecting me. I told them I wish she had stayed in foster care forever and that nobody had ever loved her, because she was a bully and I was tired of being her target. I told them she had won though. She had them and I would never see them the same way again. A year later, Amy and I got into a fight, and I was allowed to go and live with my grandparents. My parents tried to keep in touch with me, but I made no effort, and eventually I started telling people my parents had lied about me wanting them to foster and adopt Amy. People treat my parents differently as a result, and they confronted me about this 3 weeks ago. They showed up at my grandparents and said we needed to talk. They mentioned me calling them liars, and I said they were, and they became liars the second they started fostering Amy. My parents told me I had such a selfish outlook of the situation. I told them they chose Amy, so I didn't owe them or her a selfless outlook. AITA for blaming my wife after I got fired. Me wife, 36. And I, 37, have been married for 5 years and have a 4-year-old son. My wife is a pediatrician and I work in marketing. Our son is in daycare during the day and recently moved up to a new preschool room. The first few weeks in the new room were fine. But then he became friends with a couple of older boys in the class and began to have some behavioral issues. The 3 boys seem to feed off each other's energy and can get really rambunctious and play too rough. Games of tag will regress into pushing, shoving, and hitting. Nap time comes with them tossing pillows at each other and being disruptive. Disagreements turn into hitting and throwing. We've had meetings with his teachers and the director and changed the way we do a few things at home. We've tried different types of goal setting, positive reinforcement, multiple conversations, taking away of privileges, etc. But his behavior continues to be disruptive at best and dangerous at worst. We're exhausted. Next step is getting him in touch with a behavioral therapist. Thankfully, my wife knows a few of them and they can expedite the scheduling process. It's gotten to a point where we have had to pick him up from daycare in the middle of the day multiple times. The daycare has both of our cell and work contact numbers, but they only seem to ever be able to get a hold of me. I've had to leave work probably 7, 8 times in the past 2 months to get him. Every time daycare calls me, they say they tried my wife, but she didn't answer. I will then call and text my wife to see if she can get him, but her responses are always delayed to the point that daycare has had to call me back before to remind me that our son needs to be picked up. I understand she has patients to attend to, but she also has a family. After the last 2 times I had to pick up our son, my boss told me that I can't keep doing this. Then it happened again. I tried getting a hold of my wife, but she didn't answer or return texts. I told my boss I had to go pick up my son, and he told me if I leave to not bother coming back. I tried my wife again, and still nothing. I waited an hour until daycare called me again and told me I need to come get our son. So I left work and got a phone call later that day that I am fired. My wife finally called after I got home with our son. She apologized for not getting back to me sooner and gave excuses about patients. I told her that I don't want to hear it, and she doesn't need to make more excuses because I got fired, so now I can just stay home with our son anyway. She wanted to know more, but I told her I don't want to talk about it. After we got our son to bed, she asked if I wanted to talk about it, and I told her that her dedication to her job and her patience cost me my job. I told her that she never once made arrangements to pick our son up, and now we're a one-income family. She told me it isn't her fault, and I'm being a jerk for blaming her. For context, my wife and I have been struggling with our son's recent behavioral issues. His daycare has called to have him picked up early multiple times. It has been me going to get him every time because my wife won't answer her phone or return calls texts. It ended up costing me my job. I pretty much told my wife it's her fault and she told me I'm being a jerk for blaming her. I think I might be an asshole for blaming my wife after I got fired. AITA,